So the What Matters Now series that we're here to talk about today have been running now for a few years, and they are public events which aim to address subjects at the heart of modern day society and business. And really they're an opportunity for us to showcase what we do, the range and depth of our practical research, and link it and connect it to organisations outside, practitioners, colleagues from across the school, external research partners, members of the public, about providing insight, innovation, ideas on how to tackle questions and problems we all face. I want to say that the What Matters Now event are organised by the school's partnerships and engagement team, and I want to extend thank you to Stephen King, who's here today, who has helped us in organising this and offered kind support for the event and supporting the networking opportunities afterwards. So moving on now to talking about our project, the Plastic Packaging in People's Lives, PIPL project, is aimed at trying to understand this gap between what consumers are doing, are thinking, sorry, and what they are doing. And the important thing about our project is that it is about trying to find insights into this gap by looking not just at consumers themselves, but by looking at the whole supply chain, including policymakers and partners from industry who maybe help us understand this better. And what we're going to be talking about today is looking at food sector as an exemplar. We're going to be looking at marketplace actors, from consumers through to supply chain actors, through to waste management organisations, to try and understand this from multiple perspectives. That is our focus on this project. And if we have the next slide, please. And really, it's about this holistic approach to plastic food packaging waste. And as I've just mentioned, it's about bringing together consumers, businesses, and management practices to identify opportunities for intervention. On the next slide, you'll see how what we are doing on the PIPL project is aligned to the Plastic Pact 2025 targets. And this is on our webpage as well, but basically our key actions with the project are about getting a detailed and holistic understanding of consumer behaviour, creating detailed guidance for industry and policy, generating some strategies for plastic packaging waste, and creating a co-designed roadmap for improved packaging design. So it's pretty ambitious actually in terms of what we're trying to do, and we're midway through the project now. So I think the next slide will give you a sense of the project team. One of the things I started talking about was how in the management school here at Lancaster, we have the full range of management insights, and you see that here in this project. The project is led by myself, Maria, and I'm in the marketing department, and it's co-led with Alison, who you'll hear more from, who's in organisation work and technology department. We have colleagues from marketing as well, James Cronin and Alex Gandalis. We have our colleague Linda, who is from management science, and then we have John Hendry, who's from chemistry. And what this shows is the academic partners are from right across university, and we're organised around work packages, are supported by 3 research associates, and you'll hear from some of them today. We have Charlotte, who's on the consumer group, we have Savita, who's on the supply chain project, and we have Claire, who's dealing with the waste management project. And all our activities are supported by Marta, who's our administrator. So this is the academic project team. I'm now going to pass you to Alison, who's going to tell you a little bit about our partners on the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. One of the things our research project is very committed to is working with different organisations, and with the PIPL project, we're very delighted to have 11 partners on board, and as Maria indicated, we're really interested in taking this holistic approach. So we have partners that represent the entire value chain of food plastic packaging. So we have the supermarkets like Booths and Waitrose. We have suppliers such as Bells of Lazenby and Butlers. We have next generation plastic organisations such as Biotech Services. And then we have professional networks like the Institute of Materials, Mining and Materials and the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. And then we're working with people that work in the waste management sector, such as Lancaster City Council and Suez. And I'm delighted that one of our partners is here today too. Ian Schofield will be talking from their perspective about plastic packaging. So Ian's here representing Butler's Cheese, one of the suppliers. Now, for us, working with stakeholders is really important. And when I say us, Maria and myself and Stephen King from the Partnership and Engagement team did a little bit of reflection about this, because they help us align with real world problems. So there were three areas that we could illustrate with the plastic project where our partnership and working with stakeholders helped us. First was in regards to problem identification, where we had discussions with our, well, actually originally with the supermarkets. We knew we were interested in plastics and consumption, but we didn't know how. And then through those conversations and open dialogue, we were able to identify that food plastic packaging was our area of focus. Throughout the project, and as Maria indicated, we are 18 months in, but we've kept this open dialogue with the partnerships we have to try and ensure that what we're focusing on stays contemporary and relevant, because the sector changes very, very quickly. And through this dialogue, we've been able to have some knowledge exchange. And also with our partners, they've actually indicated and shown within sort of our research where we need to speak to other organisations. And without this stakeholder engagement, we wouldn't have this, or starting to have these rich findings we're seeing in the plastic project. So they're very, very important to us. So our project then really has sort of 5 work strands. We've got one that's running as a macro analysis that's looking at how plastics are embedded in cultural, historical ideas, in academic articles, in newspapers and reports. We've got the macro analysis, which we'll hear from Charlotte about a little bit about in a moment, who's part of our household level of research. We have the case studies that Savita and Linda, who are here, are working on, focusing on investigating plastics in the supply chain. And then we have another area of work where we're also trying to map out the waste management side of the project with Claire and John. So these work streams really are giving us this holistic perspective. So what we'll end up then, our last phase of this project, and as Maria indicated, it is quite ambitious, is that we'll end up with 2 projects where we want to actually rethink this consumer attitude behaviour gap and create some change and some shift. So that's a very potted, high-level view of what our project's about. So we have this slide here illustrates that we have a programme of activity, and we're halfway through. And we're starting, as I indicated, to see some really interesting results. We're connecting with sort of policy groups. On your tables, we have a couple of publications that may be of interest. Our little book of plastics in everyday life, and also the 54 Degrees, which Paul Turner is in the room with us, who's responsible for editing. It's our management school magazine that showcases some of our research too. And we've attended different conferences to disseminate this work. And for us, these knowledge exchange events are very important because we want to hear your views as well as us sharing our ideas with you. So we still have quite a lot of activity to go in the next 18 months, and we'll continue disseminating our work for feedback from the external community. So the event schedule today then really is going in this order. Maria and I were welcoming you all to What Matters Now and open it and telling you a bit about our project. We're then going to hear from Savita Verma, who's our research associate on supply chains, who's going to talk to you about our supermarkets, the new age of plastic waste processing. We'll then have time for 1 or 2 questions. And then we'll move on to Charlotte Hadley, who is in our consumption insights, as I've mentioned, Maria has already. And she's going to give us some insights about plastic and making our old companion visible. Then we'll have John Hardy, our chemist, a material scientist who's going to talk to you about what do we mean by the term plastic. And then we're going to look at the challenges of going plastic free with our plastic expert in Schofield, and who also works at Butlers, as I've mentioned, one of our partners too. We'll have some time at the end for more questions, which will invite the online and to join in the conversations too. And you know, this hybrid event does make me smile because I don't know where to look. I know the camera's up there and I'm looking at all of you at the same time. And then we'll have a wrap up and close. And for those that are with us in the room, we'll invite you to continue the conversation over lunch upstairs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over and welcome Savita to share her presentation on the supply chain.
So while the slides are going to be up, let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Savita, and I am one of the research associates looking at the supply chain side of things with Professor Linda. And we are mainly collecting data with the industry partners and non-partners, different companies that comprise of that are part of the food supply chain network. So this article particularly was written at the time of data collection, and so it basically came out of the idea that we were starting to look at this new role of supermarkets. So as a result of this is the title, Are Supermarkets the New Age Plastic Waste Processors? It's there in the 54 Degrees magazine. And so so here is a outline of my presentation. I'm going to just provide a little bit of context. So for the sake of this presentation, because we have such a short time to cover this article, it's about flexible packaging. Although I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties of what flexible packaging is, and our colleague John is much more expert in terms of the chemistry side of things, but it's the soft plastic that is going to be the focus of this presentation. Then I'll discuss the drivers for the different organizations to act, to take the steps to move away from plastic or reducing plastic in food packaging, followed by the responsibility, who's responsible for it, the ongoing debates. And I'll talk about some of the interventions that we have been observing lately from the supermarkets in terms of the plastic packaging changes. And I will then deal with implications. So why it matters now? That's the main question. This slide basically is just some facts and figures. An estimated 215 billion items of flexible plastic packaging, such as confectionery wrappers, pets, and baby food pouches, bread bags, crisp packets, are placed on the market every year. These are the numbers coming from the Suez report, published in 2017. What we see is that less than 20% of local authorities collect any form of plastic film or other flexible plastic packaging for recycling. And it's even lower in terms of what is actually being recycled, because the technicalities in terms of the contamination and all those issues. So we can see the ratio of what is being produced as opposed to what is being actually recycled at the minute. So what we are starting to see is that there is a lot of pressure to do something about it. It looks like a grand challenge. And there are several drivers that the organizations, even consumers, are facing to do something about it, to change our consumption habits, or just make certain decisions in terms of what we buy, how we buy. And also organizations are faced with this massive challenge to move away from plastic or be able to find alternative materials. So there is an increased consumer pressure on retailers. And it was particularly, it came into effect after the Blue Planet documentary, it was mentioned quite a few times in the interviews that we conducted that that was kind of the point where certainly everybody was complaining about a lot of plastic packaging in supermarkets. So there have been a lot of complaints that retailers particularly experience from consumers to do something about it. And then there is government measures being introduced in the form of plastic packaging tax, which came out this year in April, and then the extended producer responsibility, which obligates the producers to take the responsibility for collecting, recycling, and making it circular, so to say. So beyond the food waste debate, so what I mean by food waste debate is when you speak to these industry practitioners, the main argument is that there's a lot of food being prevented from wastage because plastic packaging allows that. It is easier to transport. There's various benefits of using plastic. But again, despite those advantages, there is this need to reduce the single-use plastic consumption, and there is this urgency to recycle plastic packaging as recognized by both industry and consumers. So whose responsibility is it? This is the main question that we often come across when we are reading some of the literature that's being published in this area. Also in newspaper, this is being questioned a lot in terms of who's responsible. And I do pose a question in the article. If somebody asks you who's responsible for placing a staggering amount of plastic packaging in the supermarkets, what would be your answer? And so for time's sake, I would just say that a lot of people and evidence shows that it is the retailers who are at the forefront of these debates in terms of responsibility and taking finding solutions to plastic packaging. And it's just a few screenshots of different sources that we have found that everywhere we see this responsibility aspect being highlighted in terms of whether consumers should change their behaviors or government imposing certain taxes. And then there have been certain moves, we can call them impulsive moves from supermarkets where they suddenly announced that they are banning plastic, although that's not the long-term sustainable solution. So there have been a lot of blaming and shifting of responsibility, but then the government actually does obligate the producers and the supermarkets mainly to find the solutions, not just find them, but also facilitate it for consumers. So as you can see, there is a resource charity that is urging supermarkets to do more to collect plastic bags and flexible packaging, which is led to supermarkets setting up collection points, which we can see quite a few places have already started doing that. We are seeing it more frequently these days. So all of these pressures have led to retailers, supermarkets taking some actions and trialing new solutions in terms of introducing certain reusable, refillable stations. We can also see collection points being installed at the front of the stores where consumers can come and drop their used plastic packaging. So all these different retailers that come to your mind have been doing something or the other in terms of collecting soft plastic. And the intention behind doing this is, so this is a quote that is from one of the participants from the industry, which says, "I don't think we consumers do a good enough job recycling, which is why I think the Tesco's of this world then have to step in and say, okay, we are going to help you. We're going to make this easy for you. We'll put a collection point in our store every time you shop with us. Please bring your soft plastics back with you and we will take it off your hands and we will do something positive with it." So they have this attitude that they are helping consumers to be able to do something with the plastic, because otherwise they don't know how to recycle it. So this is in a way an initiative from their side to make it easier for consumers to just come back and return it, and it's very much voluntary. There is no obligation on consumer and in terms of to what capacity they engage in initiatives. So retailers have started to invest a lot in terms of recycling infrastructure. We have been seeing that they are partnering up with waste management companies such as TerraCycle to implement new solutions in terms of refill. There was the recent launch of a collaborative effort with Loop, where they actually installed these reusable containers, which consumers could borrow and return for a small amount. So there have been different efforts from the retailers, although we really have to investigate if those are workable solutions or not, because we have obviously seen there are a lot of pitfalls of what's currently been happening with these sort of schemes, although there is obviously a very good potential if it's done on a very wide scale. But we'll see that the full picture in terms of how it's been not working out the way we anticipated to be. So there are these deposit return schemes, reuse and refill systems. There are collection points for waste recovery. These are some of the few initiatives to name that we are seeing from the supermarkets. So just to highlight some of the pitfalls that we can, this is an insight that has come up from the interviews analysis that we've done. We see that packaging innovation is seen very much as a marketing strategy by companies. It has increased a lot of competition. You would have often noticed that it's brands shouting out, this is the amount of recycled content we are now starting to introduce in our packaging. We are the first ones to do this and all that. So there is a lot of competition and it has led to a lot of material shortages in the market. There is increased price of these recycled material. There is not enough of it because there needs to be enough recovered to be able to feed into the material, the recycled material, packaging material. The retailers and suppliers, they are seen to be working very exclusively on packaging innovations with little intent. I wouldn't say no intention, but it's the laws are such that they are not allowed to speak with each other and share information in terms of what they are planning to do next within the wider supply chain. So if we speak about the collection points initiatives, we would imagine that supermarkets would be doing it collectively to make it a more viable system. But it seems that there is no collaboration taking place between the retailers in setting up those collection points. It's a very much of an individual effort, and even in terms of dealing with these materials, it's very much organization focused, thus impacting the scale and viability of these solutions. So some of the challenges that I've highlighted here that come up from both the primary and secondary data. There isn't the scale to match the consumption. There are not enough collection points. There is no capacity to deal with the waste generated. So apparently only 1% of the soft plastic is actually being collected and recycled. So this is very much of a call to action in terms of we see all these efforts and quite widely, but we would imagine that they would work very successfully and we are doing something great in terms of recycling, but in reality it's not the same as how much we consume. Community model, if we look at how these schemes work, these are run by volunteers. So it's very voluntary. There is no incentive to do it. You can have a look in terms of these main challenges that we are starting to see for these schemes. I'm just going to come to some implication for supply chain actors as we have derived from the analysis. Firstly, we need to address the gap between the collection capacity and consumer demand. So it's very important to understand how the solutions work in reality. They look very feasible in terms of proposing them, but how well they work on the ground is a different story. There is a lot of need for transparency because we don't really know what really happens to this waste that is being collected. Sometimes it is being put to a good use, but oftentimes it's downgraded and it's not even, you cannot be used for food grade. So again, it's not really that efficient. There is this perceived value of plastic packaging, which we are now seeing. Earlier, it used to be very much of a throwaway commodity, but now brands are starting to realize that this can be recovered and it can be used as a material that to be further introduced in the packaging. So there is a lot of value being created around it, even for the consumers with the deposit return schemes. It's more of a, it's seen as the consumer borrowing the packaging rather than owning it and doing whatever with it. So the value is kind of shifting for the consumers and industry. For policy implications, we see that there is a huge need for collaboration within the supply chain, which needs to be incentivized through government intervention to allow the knowledge exchange to be able to co-create packaging solutions. Again, creating a regulatory landscape for recyclers, because recyclers don't find it a very commercially viable activity. It's quite expensive to recycle certain types of plastic, particularly soft plastics. There's a lot of skills and capacity building that needs to take place so that the community engagement can be fostered better. So I think that's everything. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
We do have a question online. Okay. So we have a question from Katie.
Katie, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Or I can read it. Okay. So,
Sorry, did you say Kathy, or I couldn't hear who you said?
yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm just wondering if there are any figures for how much is actually recycled when we put all our flexible packaging, like say at Co-op or Sainsbury's, which is where I take mine. How much is actually really recycled and how much is just sorted and put away in landfill?
Yeah, there are numbers. So as I referenced the report from Suez from 2017 about how much is being currently collected curbside and what is being recycled. So there are numbers, but I think we don't have the up-to-date data in terms of what's the situation today. So yeah, but there are reports coming out. So we do try and keep ourselves updated with how much it is. But brands do provide information on their individual websites in terms of how much they have managed to recover and recycle. But again, it's transparency is still an issue. Like we don't know whether it's being exported or how much is actually being processed within the UK and what happens to it. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's I can answer most of that. It's very little. It's very little that's being recycled. Most of it's being burnt, I'm afraid, or going into landfill or being sent abroad. So very little is being recycled. Collected from curbside and actually being recycled. Very little.
But there is work going on, isn't
Yes.
there, with you know, sort of some
Lots of stuff kicked off, so sold that, but it's not there yet.
information.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So I'm going to welcome Charlotte up to talk to us about making plastics our old companion visible. Charlotte, I'm going to ask you just to stand here. I'll change for you. I'm going to move it up.
Hello, and thank you, Alison, for the introduction. So as Alison mentioned, and Maria really, so I'm Charlotte Hadley, and I'm the research associate working in the plastic packaging and people's lives team. And my work is concerned with consumers and their everyday food-related experiences, and this places a spotlight on plastic food packaging. Thank you. Okay, so we as consumers are frequently reminded of the pressing plastic problem, and particularly over the past 5 to 10 years with newspaper reportings, documentaries, and communications from NGOs, increasingly reporting on the environmental implications associated with the origins, use and disposal of plastic food packaging. And through these various forms, we are made aware of how, for instance, the very presence of plastic in our environment is causing harm and interfering with our natural environment, our ecosystems, and even our human biological systems too. And also how there are vast amounts of plastic flotsam as well, comprising the commonplace plastic bottle, plastic carrier bags, other forms of plastic wrapping, which are transforming our canals, our ocean shorelines and surfaces, and also the beaches of remote islands too. And through this various imagery, documentaries, protests, and other forms of communication, these quite devastating consequences serve as a reminder to us as consumers that the very same plastic that we encounter as we go about our daily lives, whether this be a packet of crisps, a plastic bottle of water, or a chocolate bar wrapper, for instance, that it can persist in the environment long after we have consumed the contents and disposed of the packaging. But until it becomes this menacing, troubling material as shown on the slide here, for many people, the plastic that we encounter is very rarely thought about. It's very rarely thought about. And so, so something that we talked about recently within our publication 54 Degrees is that the very concept of throwing away is a misnomer, because there is no away per se. Plastic persists in the environment and its stubborn materiality long after we have consumed the contents. And I'm so sorry. And so thinking metaphorically, one point that we could argue is that through the various imagery of plastic debris, for instance, our own plastic consumption, whether it's the packet of crisps, for instance, this can become a ghost, almost, a ghost that we encounter each time we see a new documentary, each time we read a new news reporting, or even come across a tweet on Twitter. It haunts us and it continues to remind us of the consequences, even if it is just momentarily. The plastic debris and its consequences also serve as a visual reminder of the more complex underlying problems that we face as a society that go far beyond what we do as consumers. And but we know that the pressing plastic problem is not a singular problem, but a plurality of interconnected problems. And so it also places the spotlight on, for example, outdated business models or the social value of packaging, and how it can become waste the very moment we have finished consuming the contents of that packaging. And when we talk about change, there is a lot of emphasis, as Savita touched upon earlier, on collaboration between all stakeholders involved, as it needs to create opportunities and address the problems by different stakeholders. And you and I, we as consumers, we all have a role to play here, but currently our role is laden with uncertainty, ambiguity, different stakeholder expectations and assumptions too. So I just thought I would take this opportunity to shift the focus of this presentation slightly, and unpick this role a little bit by focusing on recycling in keeping with the theme on plastic waste here, by drawing on some of our findings that are emerging through our research with consumers.
But before I do, I'll just provide you a brief insight into our work. So within this current phase, we are looking to provide an in-depth understanding of how consumers engage with plastic food packaging on a day-to-day basis. I'm currently in the middle of data collection, which started in October last year, and I have spent a considerable amount of time talking to our participants about themselves, about their lives, their routines, and developing an understanding of their food planning, preparation, shopping, storage, meal times, and of course the ways in which their foods are packaged, and how the fate of their plastic food packaging is ultimately determined. So for the majority of our participants, household recycling has become a part of their normal day-to-day routine, which may not seem surprising, but the way in which they go about their recycling and how they ultimately dispose of their plastic food packaging can vary from household to household. And we can see from our findings that there are various different factors at play here, and I won't be able to talk about all of these today, but I just wanted to provide a couple of examples to illustrate. So for a number of our participants then, whether they consider their plastic food packaging to be recyclable or not is partly determined by the way it looks and feels to them. So as you can see on this slide here, looking at the top quote from Tom, he makes a distinction between substantial packaging that he considers to be recyclable and insubstantial packaging that he considers to be non-recyclable. And similarly, within the second quote, Alan makes a distinction between quite bendy and thin plastics and hard plastics. And we also see this with a number of our other participants too. So, for example, we have Evie, Katie and John, who make a distinction between what they define as flimsy plastics and hard plastics. And so what we are seeing here is that our participants are using their tactile and visual senses and signals rooted within their tacit knowledge to determine whether their plastic food packaging can be recycled or not. And what we find interesting here are the types of plastic food packaging that fall into these categories of substantial, insubstantial, bendy and thin, and hard plastics. So when I asked Tom if he could provide a couple of examples of what he considers to be substantial packaging and therefore recyclable using his categories, he gave me the example of a mushroom tray. And for Alan, as we can see in the second quote here, what he defines as the crinkly plastic packaging that you might often find within a chocolate selection box, he considers this to be a bendy and thin plastic, which he wouldn't therefore recycle. And so what's interesting is through using their own categories, what would be considered recyclable for Tom is not necessarily considered to be recyclable for Alan. Amongst our findings, there are a number of participants that do engage with recycling labelling on the packaging, but again, the way in which this information is interpreted and the extent to which our participants actually abide by the descriptive guidance provided on the packaging varies. So within this quote that we can see here with Kath is talking about sandwich packaging from sandwiches that were purchased whilst travelling. And just to provide some context, during my time working with Kath, it became evidently clear that she cares very deeply about her impact on the environment. And she has actually done some of her own research into packaging materials which can and cannot be recycled where she lives. So just to read this point here. So Kath picked up the sandwich packaging from the bin and pointed to the labelling on the packaging which stated box recycle. Before stating, it tells you that you can recycle it, but I'm not convinced because it has plastic interior. At this point, Kath started looking at one of the corners of the packaging and began to peel back the plastic interior that lines the sandwich box. Look, it has plastic in it, Kath stated, before rhetorically asking who has got the time to peel all of this plastic film back. And she indicates that the packaging will go to landfill by the general waste local council collection bin outside. And so for Kath here, for the packaging to be deemed recyclable in her eyes, the plastic interior needed to be removed. And this is based on her understanding that she cannot recycle the soft plastic interior through her local council recycling collection service. And given the difficulties she found separating the plastic from the cardboard, this packaging ended up in the domestic waste, despite the guidance provided on the packaging, using her own judgment. I've got just one last example here. I won't read everything out on the slide here, but just to illustrate within this extract. So Katie is talking about a new leaflet that she received from the local council, which provides up-to-date information regarding what can and cannot be recycled by her curbside collection. And she indicates that her local council no longer accept the cartons that her almond milk comes sold in, but she continues to recycle them anyway, albeit separating the plastic lid from the carton itself. And when I asked Katie why she continues to recycle the packaging, she indicates that she feels bad for putting it in the general waste, and that it seems like a waste of paper and plastic that could have been recycled. And so for Katie, this packaging still holds value, it still holds recycling potential, and she feels that her local council are no longer making the most of that potential by not recycling it. So she has taken that into her own hands here. And so why this matters now? So when thinking about change, consumers can often be perceived as having quite a passive role, or almost as though they are subservient in some way, and consumers are expected to read the labelling, read comprehend the messaging, and then as it's intended, and then recycle the packaging accordingly. And looking at the government EPR consultation document that was released last year, there is an emphasis on producers to comply and to amend recycling packaging on recycling labels on the packaging to ensure consistency and to provide clarity to consumers. And this is grounded in the understanding that better information from the producers will enable consumers to make better recycling decisions. And as we can see from some of the examples provided, it is taken for granted that the recycling labels represent just one piece of information that may have a role to play in the fate of their plastic food packaging. These examples also demonstrate that consumers are not always passive. They do engage with the packaging, even if sometimes it is on a tacit, sometimes subconscious level. And they do challenge the labelling and the guidance provided based on their own understanding and their experiences. And so this matters because it demonstrates the importance of the need to think carefully about the different ways in which we do engage with consumers. Thank you.
Question.
One my question, sorry. Did you ask the local people, about their local council? Did some if you go to some parts of the country, they have 4 bins. You can put things in, whereas in Lancaster there's only 2.
Yes, no, that's a very important point. So some of my participants, when they told me about their history in terms of where they've lived, they recognise that there are differences in terms of what you can and cannot recycle depending on where you live within the country. And I think initially, as part of that move to a new place, I found that some of my participants do look at what information the council provide in terms of what is and isn't recyclable within that area initially, once that move has taken place. But then you might not necessarily always keep up to date with that, but that is a very good point depending on where you live. And so I guess the same situation, I guess, could be when you are traveling, if you're going on holiday to a different part of the UK, understanding what you can recycle where it is quite important. It's another challenge that we do have to overcome.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So now we've had all this discussion about who's responsible for plastics and making plastics visible. It's now time for John, who's going to explain to us what actually plastics is or aren't.
Oh, okay, right. So in principle, if I stand around here, I guess the folks online can see me. And fair enough. Right, I'll stand around here so that folks online can see me. Hello there. Well, the title of this talk is "What do we mean by plastic?" Actually, when you watch The Graduate, then as you can see from this meme here, plastics is probably a more accurate term, and that's because it's really a class of materials instead of just an individual material. And having moved on from a little bit of academic plagiarism, then we can move on to some of the complexities that are involved in understanding what this complex class of materials really are. And part of that complexity comes down to the English language. So when we look at the photograph on the slide here, we can see some sheep in the North York Moors. So I would obviously call it sheep. However, my mother's from Yorkshire, and or more accurately, my mum's from Yorkshire Like, and she would reliably inform me that actually it's not sheep, it's Old Moor Tuck. And that's the dialect which is used from Derbyshire up to Northumbria, which is kind of another word which has been used to describe sheep. And so I think it's obviously really important to understand that a user of the English language, their choice of words, their understanding of words, their understanding of grammar has a really big impact upon what we really understand by this. So when you look inside a dictionary, then there's 3 different ways to understand what the word plastic is. So plastic is either a kind of countable noun, so it's any one of a group of materials. And these could be in different forms, they can have a variety of different uses. It could alternatively be a singular noun, so a credit card, something like this, which is your flexible friend. Alternatively, it could be an adjective, and so that could be a descriptive word which says it's soft, a material which is soft enough to be formed into another shape. And so that could have, it could be like, when you look at this industrial process here on the slide, there's 2 sorts of plastics which are being bonded together through a heat process to give you a laminate. But obviously that also comes with other complications, because this definition also encompasses metals when you melt them and then you cast them into another shape, or indeed clays, because clays can be formed and then you bake them to form a ceramic. And so the way in which you use words really does impact this. If we move away from the Oxford English Dictionary, then there's an international organization which is governed by, or which is has partnership organizations with the chemical societies from countries across the world, and they help to define the lexicon that we use in chemistry and material science. So that's the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, and they're there to help us kind of define what new words we can use and how those new words would be used. In the same way that if you live in France or in the French-speaking part of Canada, there's an organization that helps to generate new words for new technologies or devices that come along, rather than just anglicizing the language endlessly. And so what APAC would define a plastic as is a generic term which is used in the case of a polymeric material, which can contain other substances that help to define its use. So if you think about a transparent plastic to be flexible, like LEPE, these are commonly used for plastic bags that we use in the carrier. If you go to some supermarkets like Tesco, sometimes those bags will be white. And the reason that they're white is they've got an additive inside it, which is chalk. And so that's it's low cost additive, it makes it opaque, so you can't necessarily see what's inside the bag, and it gives the consumer some discretion about what they're taking home with them. But they also acknowledge that this term is using the term plastic instead of the term polymer is a source of confusion. And then they define a polymer as a substance made of macromolecules. Again, what does that really mean? And then they define a macromolecule as a molecule with a high molecular or high relative molecular mass, the structure of which essentially comprises a chain of repetitive units. And again, it's really confusing. I can't talk to my mum about this. Like, I mean, she doesn't understand what I do anyway. So if I tell her anything about this, she'll just be sat there scratching my head, but telling me, yeah, you're wasting your life. I knew I was doing the right thing when I threw your lecture notes away when you were posted overseas. So you definitely the right decision. I was sure you'd be unemployed, and you effectively are. But so what polymers are? So polymers are these large molecules. But again, that doesn't really mean a lot to many people. If you look though on the left-hand side of this, a molecule that some people will be familiar with is paracetamol. So it's painkiller. And the molecular weight of that, chemical structure is displayed on here, and its molecular weight is 151 grams per mole. Don't worry about what that really means, but what it means is that this is something that you are familiar with, you use maybe on a daily basis, and it has a low molecular weight. Polymers, by comparison, would be effectively the same as this sort of structure, except be like a daisy chain. So you'd have many of these units in a kind of repeated format. So a bit like a piece of spaghetti. So polymers would be molecules where the molecular weight is anything from 1,000 Daltons or greater. Most of the drugs that we consume on a daily basis have got molecular weights below 100 and 500 grams per mole. That's just a broad class, either the legal ones or the less so. But then polymers have got much higher molecular weight, so 1,000 up to kind of millions of Daltons, depending on their source. And again, what does that really mean? So in real world context, what that would mean is that if you have an alkane, the lowest molecular weight alkane is methane, so it's natural gas. As you increase the molecular weight, to increase the chain length, you get to butane, so that's 4 carbons. That will be what you have in campfire burners. If you increase it a little bit further, so C8, C11, C16, so anything from octane through to diesel, so you burn in cars. And then as you move higher in the molecular weights, eventually the molecular weights of those pieces of spaghetti get so high that the chains interdigitate and it turns from being a liquid into a solid. And so then when you have solids, you have kind of crystalline solids, you have semi-crystalline solids, and you might have very kind of tough plastics. And that is in part dictated by how much interdigitation there is between those pieces of spaghetti. And so you have your melting temperature here. So you could go from kind of gas through to a liquid and then to waxes and you move further up. So there's real world applications of each of those. To explain a little bit more about why we find plastics so useful, we find them useful primarily because of their mechanical properties. So if I went last summer, I went to a craft gin store and bought myself a very nice bottle of gin to celebrate the fact that the term had finished, and then put it in a paper bag. I was like, yeah, this is a brilliant idea. This is environmentally friendly. And then I was distraught when about 100 meters outside of the shop, the bottom fell out of the plastic bag and I lost my bottle of gin. I was wearing sandals, so I also got broken glass in my foot, which is obviously not ideal. But the reason that we find plastics, if you like, so useful is that they have mechanical properties which wouldn't have that same problem. And so instead of being paper, where it's very easy for it to break, if you have other sorts of polymers that would make those sorts of materials, you can have a property which is tensile strength, which is how strong and maybe to a certain extent how stretchy something will be, and how that kind of help you, or help me, would help me to take my bottle of gin home and enjoy it in the comfort of my home with some friends. And so this is all these kind of useful mechanical properties are governed by the molecular weight of those polymers and how much indigentation there is between those polymer chains. So from about 600 carbon chains upwards is the point where you have something which is dubbed high molecular weight, and then you have quite usable mechanical properties, which would be strong and stretchy, probably, or at least back the right way. You might also ask where the polymers come from. And so the polymers that we use most routinely are derived from the fossil fuel industry. So when we extract natural oil from the grass of fossil fuel-derived oil grass, then we carry out a process. We do a refinement process, and that refinement process is a bit like a distillation that we would use when we're making whiskey. And you use this distillation process to fractionate different components and then you polymerize it. And then you take that low molecular weight component and you expose it to a catalyst, and the catalyst makes long chains. And that gives you your polymer feedstocks. Alternatively, you can look, so fossil fuels are just derived from degraded biomass. So trees, organisms that have been stored under the earth for a really long period of time at high pressure. But what we also realize is we can make oils from natural biomass. So vegetable oil we use to cook potatoes or other things. Oil we might put on salads, olive oil, stuff like that. You can extract that from biomass as well. And then in principle, you can do a refinement process. You can extract low molecular weight things you can polymerize and make the same polymers that you would extract from the fossil fuel industry. So those would be your biomass derived oils. And alternatively, nature has already realized that polymers are quite useful. So the hair on your body is keratin, so it's a protein. The muscle, collagen, inside you is another, it's a protein which coils around itself. You have elastin, which is an elastic polymer. Silk that you find in wedding dresses and underwear, that's something that organisms, so silkworms, spiders and other things use to hold their pupae inside when they're pupating from either a silkworm into a moth, or when they put their babies inside there, spiders put the baby inside there. And if you look outside any window at the moment, probably, you'll see big balls of white in the corners. And those balls of white are balls of silk, which are made by spiders that hold their eggs inside. On the slide here, you've got a cotton field. And so cotton fields make cellulose. The vast majority of the largest amount of biomass in the world is cellulose. And this is what we use in the paper industry. We use it in our clothes as well. So cotton that we use on a daily basis. We can use it to make cotton bags like that as well. So biopolymers is another source for polymers. So you get these variety of polymer feedstocks. They've got lots of different sorts of structures. Linear is probably the most common, but there are plenty of cone-like polymers, which you find inside trees. So lignins are like a molecular glue, which hold cellulose together inside plants, and then a whole variety of different structures. And then those are then processed into the plastics that we use. And so you can see that the plastic bags that we use have got lots of different additives, so colorants and other stuff, which have been used to impart some sort of outcome. So you then might want to think about what happens at the end of life. So there's loads of initiatives which are out there to reduce the amount of plastic that we might use, make it reusable, recycle it perhaps, or compost it. But again, the language that you use to describe this is a bit complicated. So is something recyclable? Is it compostable? Is it degradable? And these sorts of terms are not necessarily easily understood. While biodegradable polymers are all degradable, not all degradable polymers are biodegradable. And the reason that that definition exists is that something can degrade because it's being burnt, or it can degrade by being exposed to light for a long time, or it's been kind of exposed to enzymes, and the enzymes chop it up because they don't only make things much longer. But for something to be technically biodegradable, it's got to be chopped up by an organism. And so you can see now in the newspaper, there are worms, or more accurately, something like silkworms, which have been genetically engineered to eat polystyrene. And so there's some weird and wonderful stuff that's going on in terms of science and engineering, but the terminology around this is, again, not super straightforward to use. And it's also important to remember that polymers which are made from biomass feedstocks, so if it's made from vegetable oil or something like that, those are not necessarily degradable. But what you do see is that people dub them bio. So polyethylene terephthalate, PET, derived from fossil fuel oil, and bio-PET. The difference between those is that PET's come from the fossil fuel industry, whereas bio-PET has come from a more sustainable feedstock. But it does not inherently mean that it's degradable. So there is a system which has been derived to help you recycle stuff. And so the six most common polymers we use in plastics have each got a number. So PET's number 1, HD high density polyethylene is number 2, polyvinyl chloride PVC 3, low density polyethylene is number 4, polypropylene is number 5, and polystyrene is number 6. And these, you normally find those embossed on packaging, and that will say that this is probably easily recyclable, easily, in depending on where you live in the country and what opportunities there are to do this. But then the other class of polymers is everything else has been into class number 7. And so class 7 is polylactic acid, so it's a biopolymer. polyhydroxyalkanoates, another biopolymer, polybutylene ethylene, another kind of biologically derived polymer, polysaccharide derivatives, and then biopets, stuff like this. So this is a catch-all for everything else. So stuff that's just really grey and not all clear to the general public. And so really what this talk is supposed to highlight is that the language you use is a nightmare. So Juliet asked for Romeo, well, what's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name, is smell of sweet. However, a botanist would say, actually, au contraire. The botanist would disagree. What about Rosa foetida? That stinks. So anyway, language is really important, and I hope that if you have any questions, you'll come and have a chat with us afterwards.
Interest of time, I'm going to keep things moving. So if we have any questions, we'll have time after Ian's presentation at the end. So I'm going to welcome Ian to come and talk to us about the challenges of going plastic free.
Hi everybody. Whilst Alison's doing the slides to get them ready, I'll just give you a bit of an introduction to me. So I've been in packaging for 43 years. I trained on packaging technologies from the Co-op, that wonderful organisation of a retailer. We had 20 people in the team at that time. I worked in every factory, on cans, glass, paper, board, everything. I trained in all those factories, and I'm lucky there's not probably one product around today that I haven't actually launched in my lifetime. So I love packaging, it's in my blood. You'll find that as I go through this. And there isn't enough packaging people around, I'm afraid. We are still training them, and Kate, who should have been with me today, unfortunately she's on holiday. I'm training her at Butler's Farmhouse Cheeses. Kate is an absolutely diamond for the future, because she'll be grabbed by the world as she grows up, because I'll be in my box, but she's going to sort some of these issues out that we've got today. And I'm really pleased about that polymer session, with carbon hydrogens again. It's a long time since I did those. I'm going to touch on every part of everybody's talk, so it'll be very good from that point of view. And I've got two hats on today because I'm working with retailers, I'm working with several brands, but obviously the first people who nabbed me was Gillian and the family, which is Butler's Farmhouse Cheeses, which if you've never had those cheeses, you want to get onto them today. They're absolutely delicious, but they do cause me a lot of issues, and I'll tell you why. So the question is some of the challenges that we've got when we're trying to do this. And don't forget, I was that famous person who sat at the BBC that morning in January 2018, so that Iceland is going to go plastic free by 2023. And Richard is still on that commitment today. I stayed an extra year because I was supposed to be retiring. I stayed an extra year to see this and get it kicked off. And they still haven't achieved it. And there's some reasons why, which are on this board. So the first thing the plastic industry said to me when I'm going plastic free was, oh, you're going to make sure product quality goes down. You're going to have loads of food waste. You're going to make sure there's issues. We're never going to compromise on safety, never. And we're certainly never going to compromise on product quality. I'm pleased to say in all the things I've done so far, that we haven't even got close to that, and rightly so. What alternatives are there? We just talked about bioproducts. What alternatives are there? I'm going to go through them. Retailers have got onto this. Retailers never wait for legislation. And all the times I've worked in retailer, they never wait for legislation. They get on with it. Why? Because the consumers are telling them, they're giving them feedback every day to say, this is wrong, got to do something about it. And you have to react. So retailers never wait for legislation, they get on with it. But there's some dictations that we've got, which we can and cannot use. And Butlers particularly have got to follow these. If you're supplying Tesco, Waitrose, if you're supplying all these retailers, Marks and Spencers, we have to make sure that we hit all those dictates the retailers are giving us. Cost is a big factor. It's become a bigger cost factor in the last 2 years because guess what? Oil's going up, the alternatives are going up. Everything's a problem. So cost is an issue. But we have to package things. So, I'm also working with a design agency, and I've just, I'm working with products that were not launched for another 2 or 3 years. What products do we go into which are non-plastic? What's going to be the cost of those when we launch them in 2 years' time? We have to do that groundwork today. Curbside collection is a big issue. We've already talked about it. We're all aware of it because we have our own collection ourselves. I put very little into my waste bin now because I work very hard in my local council to try and recycle everything. Is it being recycled? Good question. I'm going to talk about that. We don't want any reduction on shelf life. Nobody wants reduction on shelf life because that provides two things: waste And it also provides an issue with shelf life for online retailers, because they need a long shelf life, don't they, to enable to go. And the cucumber always comes to mind. You know, you package a cucumber, you get 7 days, you don't, you get 2 days. So there are questions about, do we need blueberries every day? You know, from Africa or so, do we need them every day? Well, of course, the people who produce them will say, of course we do. You know, but actually, do we really need them every day? Can we just start those seasonal products? In other words, do we need any packaging at all? And in France, of course, and in Spain, they've already said, no, everything has got to be plain. You can't have bags around it, but anything under 1.5 kilos. It's a good move. And it makes you think about, do you really need packaging? Well, of course, the packaging suppliers go, of course we do, but you don't. The next thing is data sheets. I check these every day. We get loads of claims. There is no use going to a bioproduct, which is being farmed, which some countries do, are being farmed just for packaging. That's madness. You know, we need to use it for food. And then if there's waste from that, great news. We can use the waste. And I'm going to come to some of those alternatives at the end. You've also talked about refill, reduce, remove, recycle. That's embedded in our brains, and everything we're looking at. It's not all of them are doing the job we want it to do, but if we start with some of these in mind, and I'll cover it in a minute, it's really important to understand, do we really need packaging? That's the first question. The second is, can we remove it? You know, Easter eggs always come to mind of 3 years ago. Now Easter eggs have got very little packaging near them. Material availability is another big issue. Where's it coming from? Where in the world is it coming from? I've been all over the world to find packaging. I've been in the middle of China trying to find packaging. So material availability is an issue globally. And actually, there's carbon issues with that, isn't there? I'm bringing all that packaging all the way, that's good, isn't it? Or I'm bringing all that fruit all the way from Africa every day. That's good, isn't it? You know, solar power flights are not around yet, but they'll come. But you know what? Carbon's an issue. I'm going to cover that very, very quickly. And when I was training, the first lesson I had in the first book when I was doing the Institute of Packaging exam, packaging sells what it protects and protects what it sells. If you just get that in the brain, that's all you need to know about packaging. It protects what it sells and sells what it protects. Okay? First lesson you ever get when you do your Institute of Packaging exam. Oh, wrong way. Just going to touch on carbon really quickly. The only reason is that any decision that we're making these days, you have to think about carbon. Every corporate organisation that's working, every university, every structure that's being built today has got to think about its carbon output. And we can't cover it here because we're not talking carbon today, but it's in my thoughts every time I come up with a new piece of packaging, devise something new. It's very much part of corporate culture now to make sure. And of course, all the carbon commitments went out to 2055. They came down to 2050, 2045. We're now at 2035. We're coming to 2030 when people are all going to get carbon neutral. It's a good thing overall, a really good thing. And I wanted to bring this up because I talked about retailer dictates on that note. This is Tesco. Tesco are very much leading the way. Yeah, Iceland, we kicked off, we're going plastic free, and it very much got a reaction with the marketplace and so made people think about alternatives. But Tesco are very much leading the way in terms of giving their supplier base, like us at Butler's Farmhouse Cheeses, a steer on the things we can and cannot use. And there is very good reasoning behind all these formats. And I don't want you to study it because there's no test afterwards. But the main thing is, just understanding, and we just talked about some of those materials on this right-hand side in green, polyethylene, mono-flexible film, so only one polymer, in other words, polypropylene, steel aluminum, carbon. You'll be used to these because you're putting them in your bin as things that can be recycled. Funny enough, that's why they're on the green list. Anything that can't be recycled is on the red list. And you'll see very high on there, the compostable PLAs and other biodegradable plastics are on the red list. And I'm not going to cover it now, I'm going to do it in a couple of minutes, just to give you an idea why that's on the red list. But the reason why PVC, polystyrene, you cannot put them in your recycle bin. If you do, they will not get recycled. They're more likely to get sorted and sent to landfill or worse. So there's some PVCs we just talked about, and you're an expert now because you just had all the polymers broken down. But the main thing is, there's also water-soluble plastics around now, and they're very good. They're really good. But actually, We don't know how they finally break down yet. We don't know all their constituents, back to data sheets, back to proving. But there's a lot of work going on to get all these red ones onto the green list. And then you've got the amber ones, and the amber ones is really where there's no alternative at the moment. These can't do the job. You might need water barrier. You might need a moisture barrier. You might need a vapor barrier. You've got things like cooked meats that has a gas flush in there of nitrogen and oxygen to make sure that you get more shelf life of these things. You need certain laminates for that, i.e. 2 or 3 materials. I worked on bagging a box for wine all those years ago. That was a 7-layer laminate. A 7-layer laminate. Can you imagine trying to recycle that today? Impossible. So we're breaking all these down to make sure we just have one material that can easily be recycled. And working with other recyclers and all the work that's going on. There's going to be money in it for people to recycle, by the way. There's no money in it, they won't do it. So that's another big driver in here. But this is good to know that Tesco are leading the way. They are giving us all guidance to make sure that we hit all these things to make the world a better place. And we can recycle everything, or better, refill stuff. Oh, you like that? So next one was very much talking about why can't we recycle these? What's going on in the world? So the interesting thing for me is actually there's one worse than landfill at the other end. Is we're sending it to Tunisia or we're sending it to around the world to be somebody else to sort our waste. How wrong is that? We've got to stop that. So the government's under enormous pressure to stop that and sending stuff abroad. Quite rightly from us, they should be. The next worst thing, of course, is landfill. So we drive past, we see all those wagons on the tip, all our rubbish going in there. We can't keep putting in landfill. It's madness. So anytime we are looking at the next product of packaging to look at, if it's going abroad or it's going into landfill, that's really bad news. We really don't want that. We need to solve those issues. The next worst thing is probably what's happening to most of your soft plastics. It's getting burnt. Now it's getting burnt for energy. That's both good. But of course, all these plastics are fossil fuel coming out of the ground. So the other thing that we've now got coming along is chemical recycling. So all those carbon and hydrogen bonds we're talking about there are now being broken down again with heat called pyrolysis and actually being knocked back into an oil or a residue that can actually be used instead of taking fossil fuel out. And there's a brand new plant being built in the northeast of England in Middlesbrough. It will be ready very shortly at the end of this year, which will do nothing but chemically recycle. So in other words, tires, plastics, everything goes into a bin and it basically comes out as an oil again. So that's chemical recycling, which is another route, but it's not our favourite yet. We've then got mechanical recycling, which is the bit that we do at the back of our stores. We put our PET bottles in, those PET bottles go to another site and all together, and they're collected and are made back into PET bottles again. And there's legislation at the back of this that we've had that came in April this year, where you have to have 60% recycled content in your plastics, otherwise you have a plastic tax. And that started this year. So the government is driving recyclability. The problem's been that you can't get enough of that recycler. That recycler's not available. So amazingly, it's cheaper at the moment to use virgin fossil fuel. How mad is that? But that's what's happened because of the legislation and because of the economy. So we're actually going to use more virgin because we can't get recycled. So there's a lot of work to be done there, hell of a lot of work, and people are working on it, I'm pleased to say. But the best of all those is reuse. We should be reusing. Somebody mentioned I think you mentioned the loop system. The loop system's in Carrefour now in France. It's in Tesco. It's got mixed results, and you pay a deposit for your piece of packaging, but at least you reuse it. Taking your Tupperware or other articles back, filling things up. Retailers are trying it. Waitrose, Asda, lots of people are starting to do refill. Beer you can get now. I've done milk once. Milk didn't work too well for hygiene reasons. But shampoos, detergents, everything is now being tried. And things I'm working on are very much around, can we reuse packaging? It's got to be the right way to go. Single-use packaging is a nightmare for us. We can't do all the things we need to do it. And this is where it just gives you a feel. Is that understandable to everybody? So let's get to cheese. Wonderful cheese. I feel like some myself now, quite peckish. So cheese, when I started with with Butler's Farmhouse cheeses, Jill and the family looked at me as though I had two heads and said, "You're going to change all your packaging." What? Packaging wasn't really important to them. They knew what it did. Of course they did. But actually, they had nylon mixed with polythene. They had a lot of wax all over their papers. None of this could be recycled. So I said to them, "You've got to change all your packaging." That was really popular, really popular. Still popular today because I've still tested loads of things on them. And I said, the first thing we've got to do, get everything into mono materials. Next thing is get the recyclative we talked about because we knew tax was coming. And we also know that EPR, extended producer responsibilities, which will be much higher cost to the end user. The end user has to pay this. The retailer or Butler's Farmhouse cheeses will have to pay this. It's coming in probably 2025, I would guess. Is that if you've got packaging that cannot be recycled, you will actually get a very, very heavy cost of that packaging. So it's driving behavior. And the third thing is look for alternatives. So the first part of the journey was in Butler's Farmhouse cheese, they do three things. They do hard cheese. Hard cheese is a very different breathing rate to a blue cheese. Blue cheese needs to breathe, hard cheese doesn't. And then you've got soft cheese, which actually does need to breathe, but at different rates to the other ones. Therefore, that's why they have wax around it and polypropylene coated papers, none of which could be and can't be today recycled. So we had to change everything, and we actually did that in a very systematic way, going through trials and shelf lives and the machine, the engineers. You can imagine me turning up saying, "Sorry, you can't use that in 2 years' time. You've got to start moving something else." They love me, absolutely love me. And the main thing is they've worked really hard at getting these materials in. And I think the perfect British cheese board is a very good example, because before you had PET, virgin PET, it had a PE, polythene, and polyester, so a mixed laminate lidding, and then obviously it went into a carton. It had three different breathing rates because there's three different cheeses in there. So we'd actually put holes into the film to make sure that we could get the blue cheese to breathe. With gas flush one compartment. Talk about a difficult piece of packaging. It's almost impossible. And that's why Butlers are really good at producing quality cheese and quality packaging. But the main thing is we made it 100% recyclable by putting in PET with recycled content. We just lit the lid in PET only. That brought certain issues to try and seal that material at the speed we need to seal it at. And then made sure that it was absolutely 100% virgin board or recycled board with it. So in other words, that pack is completely recyclable. However, is everyone recycling it? No. So all the things that we're working on are all for the future, so that when at the back of our houses, we can recycle everything. That's what we're looking for, or better, refill it or whatever. So the interesting thing is in Ireland, I'm working with a retailer in Ireland, for instance, they do collect soft film. They collect it from the back of all our homes in Southern Ireland. And the beauty is, what happens to that? It goes in landfill, brilliant, or it gets burned. Not the best. But they're collecting it. So that's the other thing, is the infrastructure is still being built, and that will include the government working really hard in Ireland, as it is here, to make sure that we have these infrastructures in place or collection systems to make sure it goes back into something else. It is actually recycled, not downcycled into benches or anything else, although that's better than going to landfill. So when you talk about all these terms recycling, is it actually being recycled back into that material, or is it going downcycling into benches or roadworks or whatever it might be? So great story. It continues on. We're on with now looking at non-plastic, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. So some of the things I'm involved with and industry-wide is that we're looking at how can we aid recycling. So all these butter wrappers with foil on and paper on couldn't be recycled, but now they can. There are butter wrappers available to do that. All these pet food brands used to have mixed laminates to keep the dog food for 2 years. Now it's all in polythene or it's in PET only. Still laminates in some cases, but of the same polymer. So it can be recycled. Some of the coatings that we put on, so people forget in packaging, there's lots of coatings, varnishes, inks, all these boring stuff that we get for you to buy the product. We've got to watch how much we put of that on now. And the rules are becoming for next year, you've got to have less than 10%. The sandwich box is on there, that's a good one, the sandwich one. 10% of anything else to the material, the primary material, it's going to be less than 10% weight for the recyclers to be able to recycle it. And that's going to be one of the rules that's coming in from next year. So Just the interesting one about sandwich roll packs and some others that you'll have seen. M&S launched some with fish and other things where you have to peel the thing off. The consumer's not going to do that. If we make it hard for people to do things, they're not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. And the other thing is it really recyclable? It's a bit of greenwash because you're having to part things and do things. It's a way of working that we started off. I think that's died off really quickly. We've now got to get down to nitty gritty of doing it properly. Inks. A lot of inks now, you know, we've got rid of all the bisphenol A's, all these nasties that were around. We've got rid of all those in the inks now. So we've worked on that. We've even, I put, you know, even Australia here doing mono materials. Again, all confectionery was all like laminates of mixed materials. Now, thankfully, we've got all those sorted and it's coming really quickly. So we're getting ready for the recycling bit or better going forward. And even Lancaster, if you didn't know, in Iceland, we got rid of all our black plastic trays. We used 100 million a year of them. We got rid of them because the sorters couldn't resolve them when they were going down the lines because the near infrared lasers that were picking them up could not decipher them to recycle them. So they were all going into landfill or whatever. So that's why a lot of people got rid of black. But actually now the pigment that goes into there has now changed so that it can be detected by those scanners. So there's loads of work, it's nitty-gritty stuff, but really important just to be able to get things recycled. So it just gives you a feel, doesn't it? It gives you a feel of all the work that's going on. You're going to shout at me when I've got 2 minutes to go, by the way. No, when I've got 2 minutes to go, you shout at me. Right. We talked about refill, critical, right? So you've seen this. We've now got beer being refilled in Asda. You can go and top your beer up. It's good stuff as well. But you can see reusable balls being used at tennis matches, at rugby matches, at the NFL. All these things are going to start. Wall dispensers, packaging, you know, packaging-free shopping. It's all started to happen. We're not all going to do it, but if we take 10% of everything that we do at the moment, we don't have it on salads, and we don't have it on, you know, all our fruit, and we don't have it on our, you know, some of our other products like cereals, which you can get away with, then again, it's a lot of packaging not being used, and we don't have to send it to to be looked after. But also, we're seeing concentrates. So instead of shipping water all over the world like we do, detergent companies, shampoo companies, all these are now starting to get rid of all the water and go into concentrates, or better, refillable bottles that you can just put the tablet in and put some water in from home. So shipping water all around the world like we've been doing. So all these things, little things, make a massive difference. And people like Procter & Gamble, these big Unilevers, are taking tons and tons of plastic out by doing this, tons of it. So new materials coming along. So we talked about challenges. It's all about challenges. So I am looking at every material under the sun, from apple waste, pumice waste, to orange pith, algae, crustaceans, seaweed. In fact, seaweed's coming commercially available now. You know, breaking down of material. I think you mentioned it. You know, such things that you can put in your plastic that make it break down. They've all got to be proven. These we've got to do shelf life tests on them. So for Butler's Farmhouse cheese, for instance, it makes a lot of sense for us to look at paper in the first instance. Can we put all our cheese back into paper? How we used to get it all those years ago, you know? Can we put it back into paper and give it the same barrier it used to have before? Why is paper better than plastic? Well, paper, 3 trees are planted for every one coming out of the ground these days, if you didn't know that. So all the forests that we're farming, 3 trees are going in for every one. Of course, in the UK, it takes 30 years for those to grow back. In Scandinavia, a lot longer, whether they're spruce, pine, or whatever those are. So we're working with all the board mills to make sure that, you know, we can have that paper that we need in years to come. And it's not actually taking any resource out of the ground, whereas oil is. Now, it might take more energy to produce some of that wood sometimes. That's the balance of carbon you're having on your packaging choice. But we shouldn't be taking oil out of the ground like we are. We've got to stop it. So it's that interesting debate that we're all having as consumers against the price you're going to pay for your products. You know, it's a balance. So can I just assure you, there's a hell of a lot going on in this area. We're testing it. We're going to find out what works. Some won't, but it's got to be waste. We can't be growing PLA or materials for PLA in Malaysia just for packaging feedstock. It's mad. It has to be a waste product. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay, 1 minute one, that's brilliant. So I won't go through all these, it just shows, but I think the one that we need to cover, which is really two we need to cover, is format, because you can look at different formats. You've probably seen all those shrink wraps you used to get, millions and millions of shrink wraps on your beer and around your, again, just thinking differently, you can put it into a recyclable material, you can actually just put it in board. So, you know, again, it's just a different way, and you can actually put it in paper. So just thinking like I am about design 2 years on, how can we not use plastic? There's lots of ways you don't have to use plastic. You just have to think about it with your product development team, your packaging team, and your marketing team. You have to look at every aspect of it, but you can change format, that's one. Some people have done it. Morrison's at the middle are testing Tetra Pak against polythene bottles. Is it the right thing to do? Not all councils have Tetra Pak or Helipack and SIG, but to be honest with everyone, they're all the same thing, making cartons, and can you recycle them against polythene? But the interesting thing, they've done it. So we're going to find out through this test if it works, if the consumer accepts it or not, and are they all being recycled? So there's lots going on, including bottles, paper bottles. So I just want to cover composting to finish. So the reason it's on the red list is for two reasons. One, we have no infrastructure whatsoever in the UK or collection infrastructure to, at the back of our houses or any councils, to go and put our compost in. We just don't have it. Only 1% of the population compost, if you're lucky. And actually in our country, it's not really good because you need oxygen, a lot of it, and you need heat. So we need industrial composting for this, right? And industrial composting is widespread in Italy, in Germany, in Scandinavia, not here. So that's why it's on the red list. There's another reason. It contaminates the plastic waste stream. So if we put all our compost stuff in with our plastics, it contaminates the plastic waste stream, which we need to be pure to recycle into other items. So there's two reasons why it's on, where these are not in here. And lots of people are claiming, oh, we're going so green, we're going into compostable this, compostable that. Well, actually, they're not. They're actually contaminating the waste stream. Now, on the other side of the fence, do we need these for the future? Absolutely, we do. I really believe that. We really need to make sure we've got an infrastructure for this, and I'm sure the retailers will spark up, and so will waste companies to make this happen. That's one of my big predictions here. They've got to make sure that bio products and compostable packaging is alive and well for us. We need it for the future, but right now it's on the red list. So just watch this space in terms of what's going to happen there. And I think, because I've got no time left, I can't do advances like, you know, oxygen scavengers and some of these other things that's happening on packaging. Packaging is so complicated. People make it complicated because it's advancing so quickly. And if we can give more shelf life by putting a coating on something that's not contaminating the product, obviously not questioning product safety, but it's actually giving us more shelf life, but it can still be recycled or reused, then we're doing our job. That's me. Thank you.